my paranormal experiences started when I was a child. This particular experience started back in 2021 in October. I had just had my daughter. We were just home for a couple days after she was born, and I'd had some postpartum complications with blood pressure. So I had to go back to the hospital. Now, getting ready to go back to the hospital takes forever with a newborn. So we decided to finally leave. I think it was around 2 a.m. in the morning. Now, we're located in Washington State in a town called Maple Valley. It's pretty developed, but there are pockets of woods and wilderness still around. And we were heading on Route 169. We're heading back to Seattle to the hospital at about 2 a.m. And we're traveling towards Renton. There's this trail that is parallel to Route 69. It runs northeast, and the trail it's called the Cedar River Trail, and it crosses over the Cedar River. And when we were traveling on 169, there's like a pizza place and a gas station. There's no one on the road. We're the only cars, completely dark. I am in the back seat with my daughter. My boyfriend is driving, and we're just driving. We've driven this road many, many times. And as we come around a bend, there is this creature in the headlights. It's right before, on 169 in Maple Valley, right before Southeast 216th. There's a Cascadia Pizza on the right, and I believe it's a Sunoco. Sorry, I'm from Pennsylvania. A Shell station. It's a Shell station on the left. And at first, I wasn't sure what was going on because I'm sleep deprived and eclamptic and haven't eaten anything or slept. So I'm just kind of like looking from the back seat through the front windshield, and we're not really talking. We're just driving. And there's this creature that's crossing the road from left to right, from the Shell station towards the fork in the road where Southeast 216th Way is and the pizza place. And I couldn't make it out. I was just so not understanding what I was looking at. It was like a bent over pair of legs is the best way I can describe it. Had no hair whatsoever. It was like a orangish brown color, and it had this really deformed, very underdeveloped upper body that just kind of like hung from the waist of the legs, I guess. The legs kind of walked in a really stilted robotic type of way. Like, I work in equine medicine, and we do a lot of sports medicine, gait analysis type of work where we look for lameness and treat problems. And the best way I can describe it is this: it was a very hard hitting gait. Like, it would kind of robotically move its leg and then slam it on the ground, and then robotically move its leg and slam it on the ground. And when it did that, its upper body that was really underdeveloped, and it just hung from its, not torso, more like its waist. It jiggled, had very small arms, a very small chest. I didn't see a head. My boyfriend, I don't remember him saying that he had seen a head. It was, yeah, I don't know. It just walked. And like I said, there were no other cars. It was in our headlights. And then as it was walking, it just walked towards, there's like a wooded line between 169 and Southeast 216th Way. Not a lot of trees, just a couple. And it was kind of like, I don't know. I didn't know what it was, and I had never seen anything like it. I kind of stopped and was like, what was that? And my boyfriend, I could tell, had seen it too. He just kind of was silent and he was like, I don't know. And I was like, what was that? And he was like, I don't know. And we're just kind of stunned. It was walking in front of our car. It walked towards the trees. And then as it got to the shoulder of the road, it just literally kind of dissolved. It just dissolved into thin air. We didn't see it go into the trees. We didn't see it walk on the grass. It just, from the road, went into nothingness. And it wasn't like a completely disappeared into a portal or anything like that. I know some people talk about they see Sasquatch or Dogman or other cryptids and they walk through what seems like an invisible tunnel. But it was just like it literally just piece by piece kind of dissolved. Like, yeah, it wasn't a clean escape. So I'm thinking, I'm not really sure. Like, I grew up, knowing that cryptids exist. My dad was an extremely avid Bigfoot fan, like read everything. I was probably one of the only 8-year-olds that knew who Grover Krantz was. And I knew that they existed. I didn't really know Dogman existed until your channel. But this thing, I was like, I can't categorize it. I have no idea what that thing is. Yeah, I don't know if it was a skinwalker or a rake. The thing is the reason I reached out is because when we had this experience, I tried to find out what it was, and there really weren't any like resources. Like a friend of mine, I told her about it and she was like, oh, I read about a similar experience up in Bellingham, Washington, and it kind of describes what you're talking about. But I have yet to see or hear anything that resembles what it was. It didn't recognize us. It didn't look at us, or I don't even know if it could. There was no recognition whatsoever. It just kind of was like a brief moment in time where this thing was crossing the road at 3 a.m. And that was it. We just happened to catch it in that moment in time. And it wasn't in a hurry to cross the road. It was just like, if you had like kind of glanced at it, it would just look like a walking pair of legs, basically. And no of her body, unless you really looked at it. And then when you really looked at it, you realized hanging over the front of the legs was this underdeveloped upper body. It would probably it didn't extend past its knees. And I want to say the legs were very human looking. Not exactly human looking, but they didn't look like a dog's legs. It didn't look like, any kind of where the tarsal joints are the midpoint in the leg, like how people say backwards legs. It's actually just the tarsal joints are higher in dogs than ours. But it just kind of, it had overdeveloped thighs and feet that were flat and what looked like calves, and had just like a really strange way of moving its limbs. And it was pretty solid when we saw it. And when the lights hit it, it did look like an orangish brown. It was like a lighter, more orangey than brown color. And it was pretty uniform. I didn't see any other distinctive markings. Yeah, it literally, I think the upper body probably just had little arms that were just dangling, just like the rest of its body. Like it had no bones. It was like very, just like gelatinous, no structure whatsoever, just hanging from the legs. And just walked from left to right. It hasn't been seen since. We've driven that road many, many, many times. I've never driven it at 2 a.m., but we drive it to go to work, to go to, shopping, anywhere. And it's a pretty rural road. It makes sense that there are bodies of water nearby, which I know is usually a sign of cryptid activity. The Cedar River's right there. And there's no housing developments. It's just like kind of a long road that has some businesses here and there, but it's mostly wooded. It's a scenic trail. People bike on it, walk on it all the time. It's several miles long. And again, have never come across any other type of cryptid story or ghost story. I definitely don't think it was a ghost. It didn't seem like a ghost. It definitely didn't look like one. It didn't look like a human apparition. It just looked like a weird, hairless, gelatinous creature. It probably was about the size of, I don't know, it was probably about the size of a human, an average human. The legs were. It wasn't super tiny. It wasn't super big. It was probably really average. You know, if you had seen probably a 6-foot man walking along with no torso and no upper body, that's probably about what size it was. And it took me a while to realize that there was actually another part of it besides the legs. It was just so apparent that there was just its legs walking across the street very slowly, very purposefully. And I will never forget it. I know that my boyfriend has a similar experience with his memories with it. We call it Monster Crossing. Every time we pass by there where the Shell station is, we call it Monster Crossing. And he just calls it the monster. It's very ugly. And again, I've never seen anything like it since then. So that really concludes that portion of our experience with a Skinwalker rake, whatever it was. I hope to never see one again. But it didn't interact with us. It didn't make me feel afraid. It didn't do anything other than make me feel like I don't know what's going on in the universe, which I already knew. But now that I've seen that, I know that there are more things out there that we can't explain, and really anything is possible. If those things exist and you can see them, and I don't know if they're in another dimension, which they probably are, like Bigfoot and Dogmen. There's all kinds of possibilities of what people see. So I really do feel for people that have had experiences where there really are no resources for them to kind of figure out what goes on. You know, for Bigfoot, aliens, those kinds of things. There are so many people who have been witnesses to that. So many people that have had books written and TV shows and everything. There's so many things that you can kind of like read to reason what you saw and relate to other people's experiences. And this one, not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. And usually it's really different because every single story you hear is like the physical traits aren't exactly the same. Sometimes they look more alien and they have a developed upper body, or, you know, they're aggressive and they come towards you, or, you know, all kinds of things. This thing was just this passing by thing that didn't really have any awareness of us that I think of. And they had just happened to be on the road that we were on. As far as other experiences, I've had many. When we lived here, I don't know, probably about 8 years ago, we lived in Tacoma, and we lived in this house that was extremely haunted. I mean, I lived in houses that have had a very, very frequent activity, but this house, there was something in this house. I don't know what it was. I don't like to throw the word evil around. I never felt threatened. My boyfriend did. But there were instances where something would happen in the house, and I felt like I was being warned. We did have in Washington, there's this really common heater that people put in the walls. It's like a blower heater. It's cheap. I think rentals just have them just because they're cheap and they can be easily replaced. They're not like baseboard heat or a furnace. And I remember being upstairs and just kind of having the warning that there was something going on downstairs. And I went downstairs, and the heater in the living room, in the wall, was like glowing red hot. It was so hot. It was going to catch on fire at any second. So I immediately shut it off, and it didn't catch on fire, and we didn't use it for the rest of our time in that rental at all. But I definitely was asleep, and something woke me up, and I knew that there's something wrong. My boyfriend had a really bad experience in that house, and he would sleep on the couch a lot because he would just fall asleep there, and I didn't disturb him. So he would stay sleeping down there. I would go upstairs to go to bed, and he had a lot of bad experiences. Actually, it's funny because where that heater is in the wall is right at the end of the couch, and his head used to be right there. And he had so many sleep paralysis dreams, so many dreams where really ugly looking beings would come and threaten him, and, you know, he would be able to move or speak or anything. And it was just a really terrifying experience for him. I know that before we moved in, there were people that had a lot of domestic violence experiences. And so I don't know if it just was the energetics of the rental, or they just didn't like male energy and they just took it out on him. I remember I wasn't feeling well and I was laying in bed. I think I got up to take some Advil and then went to lay back down. I put the TV on in the bedroom and I just kind of like dozed off. I still felt awake, but I was dozing off. And my boyfriend was walking up the stairs, and I thought it was my boyfriend. I heard steps coming up the stairs, and I couldn't move. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't speak. I just assumed it was him coming upstairs to go to the restroom. Our only bathroom in that rental was upstairs. So every morning, you know, at like 5 a.m. to go to work, he would come upstairs, go to the bathroom, you know, all that stuff. So I would hear it, and I realized that instead of whatever's coming up the steps is going towards the bathroom, it's going the opposite direction around the foot of the bed that I'm laying on. And I, again, can't open my eyes. I can't speak. But I can kind of like see like little slits through my eyelids. Like I can't open them all the way, but I can kind of see. And there's this what looks like blobbish looking shadow coming around the foot of the bed. And I can still hear the TV. It doesn't feel like a dream. I can still hear the TV. You know, the news is on, the local news, and the weather lady is telling us what kind of weather we're going to have that day. And so I'm aware of what's going on. I don't think I'm dreaming, but I'm also kind of in a sleep state, basically sleep paralysis. And as this shadow is moving around the corner of the bed, I'm still hoping that it's my boyfriend. And I'm able to reach out my left hand. And, you know, I'm just holding it out, hoping that he's going to take it. And something takes it, but it's not him. It feels like a really old, wrinkly hand, like a small woman's hand. Definitely a lot of wrinkles in the palm. And it's not his. And all of a sudden I realize this isn't him, it's something else. And I am freaking out on the inside, but again, I cannot move. I cannot talk. I can't open my eyes. And whatever this thing is, it starts whispering in my ear. But I am too, like, my adrenaline is going way too much in order for me to even focus on what this thing is saying to me. I didn't feel threatened per se. I really feel like it was trying to comfort me because I was feeling sick. But I was freaking out. Like, you know, why am I not able to move? Why can't I open my eyes and look at this thing? Like, why? And so finally, I am freaking out to the point where I guess they're realizing this isn't working. Like, I don't feel comforted. And I opened my, I was able to move my knee, my right knee. I had like my knee like propped up. And finally I was able to move my knee and open my eyes. And I looked around and there was nothing there. The TV was still on. The weather lady was still there. I didn't see my boyfriend at all. I'm like, what? So I walked downstairs and it's dark and he's still sleeping. He never got up. So I realized that it wasn't him. He never came upstairs. And ever since then, I always felt like there was this maternal type of energy always kind of looking out for me there. I never had any super scary experiences there like my boyfriend did. I did have a cat. His name was Miles. And he would just stand on the landing on the stairs. And we lived many, many places. Like I'm from Pennsylvania. I lived in Kentucky, and worked in a rural hospital for horses for like 3 years. And, I got him in Kentucky. We lived in like, I want to say 7 different houses. And he always had houses that had steps, and we lived in multiple places that were haunted, but this particular place really bothered my cat. And he would sit at the landing of the steps. There was like this big 3 steps, a landing, and then all the way up the steps went to the bedroom. And he would just stand on the landing before he decided to go upstairs. He would never just go upstairs. He always wanted to know what was there and what was coming up and down. And there was one experience where we were on the couch in the living room. I was asleep, laying down on the couch. My boyfriend was also asleep, sitting upright. And I was facing towards the back of the couch. So my back was towards the front of the couch and the TV in the middle of the room. And then my cat was sleeping up on the back of the couch where your head goes. And I remember just laying there sleeping. We're all asleep. And all of a sudden it feels like something sits down on the couch behind me, behind my legs. So like my legs are kind of crooked, bent up at the knees. And so there is a space behind my legs to sit on the couch. Whatever it was, it sat on the couch. So to the point where I was rolling into them, like the weight of them, I was rolling backwards into them. And then my cat just started yowling. And then I woke up and it stopped. But that was the only time I've ever felt anybody sit on, like I know people talk about feeling to sit on the bed, sitting on chairs next to them, or seeing imprints of people sitting on things. I never experienced that. That was the only time that's ever happened. There was like an experience in that house where actually it happened all the time. If you fell asleep downstairs and you were just laying there and you would hear marbles rolling. We didn't have any marbles. The living room had carpet, but there was a little hallway with a kitchen that had laminate floor. And it just sounded like there were marbles rolling on it. I even set out a recorder and tried to record the rolling sounds. And I did. And we never really understood where that was coming from or why only at night, why marbles. I do remember doing some yard work behind the house. It had like a small alleyway where I was digging up soil and there were marbles buried back there. I don't know if a child lived there or it was just a hotbed of activity, but I thought that was kind of odd. There was also a time where we had some guinea pigs and they were in a cage in the living room, and there was this like black ball of, it wasn't really light. It was like a shadow, but it was a ball, and it just came out of nowhere. It was flying around the room, and to the point where it terrified the guinea pigs. They saw their flight animals, so anything scares them, but it kind of flew above their cage really fast. And I had one guinea pig, Clint Beastwood, that he would run at anything, but he was so terrified. He just ran into one of his houses and didn't come out for the rest of the night. And it was very fast. It wasn't like you could barely even, like, what was that? And you just called swinging around the room and then it was gone. And it was like, what was that? So odd. So odd. And when we were moving into that house, I remember we lived in, it was like a triplex, and we were living in an apartment that was in the middle, and this one was off to the side. It had an extra bedroom, so we wanted it for the extra space when it became available. So it became available, and we were moving things over, not with a truck, but just literally walking over, and we put the TV over there. And I think that was the first thing we moved over there. And we went back to get more stuff, and then we come back and the TV's on, like within hours of us moving in. And I was like, that's funny, but I didn't really think much of it. I was like, it's a coincidence, or maybe it is, some activity, but I didn't really think that it was anything to worry about. And then when we were leaving, and we lived there about a year, and when we were leaving, I wasn't there the last day. My boyfriend was there cleaning up. It was like the last day of our lease. And the whole time, he just felt like somebody was looming over him. And it was completely empty. He was just cleaning the kitchen floor. He just kept feeling like something was watching him. Something was watching him. And then when he went to leave, like for good, and lock up, the door slammed in his face. So like he walked out the door, turned around to close it, and it just slammed in his face. And then he locked it. You know, it was kind of like good riddance. So that house was, I don't know. I know that there was mold in the house because it was like a hacienda style house, and the roof leaked, and it was a rental. So the homeowner didn't really want to take care of it, just sold it to a rental company that had a bunch of rentals, and, you know, they had just purchased it. They didn't really spend the money on it. But I do remember the construction workers in the unit next door to us, they had torn open the walls because the previous tenant had complained about mold in her walls. And I heard him through the wall talking about how there was mold all the way down to the studs. So they had to redo everything. And so I know a lot of people would probably say some of our experiences were due to mold exposure. And while that may be true, I can't rule them all out. Like, there is no way. Like, I would think that some hallucinations or something like that would cause, or just like feelings of anxiety. I never really felt anxiety in that house. I just knew that there was other things there taking up the space. So it wasn't like, some people feel like they're sitting in a room that has a lot of electricity, like a lot of electrical currents and things like that they feel anxiety. It didn't feel that way. And we never had any respiratory issues. We never had any like coughs or allergies or anything like that. So I can't completely rule out the molds, but also too, I feel like there's just so many experiences there that I just can't let them. I can't think for the rest of my life that was just mold. I don't think so. And if you remember, 2 nights into us moving in as well, we were sleeping, and I remember laying on the bed, and I just felt something lifting me up, like at my waist. I was laying on my back, and I felt like something was lifting me up off of the bed with my waist. I wasn't levitating completely, but I felt like something was literally, like, with force, had their arms around my waist and was lifting me up off the bed. And then I woke up and, you know, I went back down on the bed. So it just felt like we weren't wanted there, and that there were so many different energies there. It wasn't just one, like, old tenant or something like that. There were just so many different experiences. And that was, the worst house we ever lived in. The next house that I had lived in that had a lot of activity in it was a house I lived at it was a house in Simpsonville, Kentucky. And it was a house that was company supplied by my employer. It was 2 doors down from the equine hospital. And there was so much activity in that house as well. I lived there alone at the time, and they had, I don't know, it was probably like built in the 60s or something like that. It wasn't terribly old, but it hadn't been worked on in years. So it had a lot of character. And I remember I wasn't home a lot because I was on call all the time. But when I was home, I always felt like there was something there. And I remember the ceiling fan would go on, just like when I was in the kitchen, just like randomly. Or a light would come on randomly when I was in the kitchen. Or I remember getting one of those Glade plugins. It was like a bi-Glade plugin, but it was something that you plugged in, and it released a scent, I want to say every hour. And I remember putting it in the laundry room, and it would emit smell like every 1 or 2 hours. And then I'm sitting there in the living room, and it's like across the house from the laundry room. And the laundry room, I hear this spray, 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 spray. So I realized that whatever I have in there is either malfunctioning or something is finding it very entertaining to play with. And I had to eventually just like throw it away because it wouldn't stop. Every time I put the batteries in, after that first day of me putting it in there, it just kept spraying and spraying and spraying and spraying like it was entertaining. So it was a friendly ghost. I would smell like women's perfume or men's cologne. And again, I lived alone, so it definitely wasn't somebody that was visiting me or anything like that. There was one evening where I experienced a house fire, and somebody was looking out for me because it was like in the middle of February in Kentucky, so it was cold. There was snow on the ground, and there was a fuse box in the basement. And I just remember being really cold. My furnace wasn't working well. And I was going into the spare bedroom to get a blanket. Now, this was a room that I seldom went into. It literally was a storage room. I didn't sleep in it. I didn't have a lot of visitors. So I opened the door to go get a blanket. And as soon as I opened the door, I see smoke. Like the moment I walk in the door, smoke starts billowing out from the corner of the floor. And underneath that floor is the basement where fuse box is. And I'm like, oh man. So I go downstairs to the basement and the whole ceiling is in flames. And the smoke detector never went off. So I literally caught it before it got really out of hand. And I was able to get my animals out and my car keys. I remember fishing my car keys out of the couch cushions after the power went out. So literally I had seconds between me going into the spare bedroom and finding the smoke billowing from the floor to me gathering all my animals, power going out, me getting my keys, and being able to move my car away from the house so that the fire department could come and access the house. So it was just, the timing was too perfect. And it was late. Usually I would have been asleep, but I was up because it was cold, and it was probably about, I'd say 11 p.m. And the timing was perfect. I walked into that room. It was totally fine. Within seconds, the smoke comes billowing in. I mean, that's a little too coincidental for me. I was very appreciative. And so after that experience, the owner had the house completely renovated. And one of the interns, her father-in-law, was a fire chief, and he told me that he really felt that all of the things I was experiencing in the house were from bad wiring. So the fan turning on and the light turning on and all that stuff. And I was like, well, maybe that's true. So I get back in my house after it's been renovated, and I'm in the kitchen. And in the kitchen, I'm just heating up some food. I'm putting it in the microwave. And as soon as I put it in the microwave, I'm thinking to myself, maybe he was right. Maybe it was all bad wiring. And as soon as I shut the door to the microwave, it turned on by itself. Kind of like a sign that it was like, no, it actually was us. Like, it wasn't bad wiring. So, I mean, even after the renovation and everything, it was still happening. And it was funny because there was this inscription on one of the walls in the living room after they painted it. So they completely painted all the house. It was just, a random thing that happened. Everything was white. And then within weeks of me moving in, there was this, what looked like pencil inscription on the wall in the living room. And at first I thought it was Spanish, but it wasn't Spanish. It was something else. And I sent it to some native Spanish speakers, and they were like, yeah, that's not Spanish. I took a picture of it, and I don't remember exactly what the letters were, but it just randomly showed up, like within days of me moving back in. So I have no idea what that was about or how it got there. Again, I lived alone. Nobody came over. I worked a lot. It was just my cat and my guinea pigs most of the time. One last story that I can think of that is actually very personal to me is my brother, Jason, passed away when he was 2 months from his 18th birthday. And I was 7 years old. He drowned in a river, and obviously our family was never the same since then. But there have been moments where he'll crop up in my life. And the largest one, I will say, is recently, right before I had my daughter. He showed up for me in a way that was really interesting. And I wasn't planning on having children for most of my life. I kind of thought about it when I turned 32-ish. And then I was like, okay, I'm not really sure. It was probably, I think it was the New Year's of 2020. It was either 2020 or 2019. And I think it was New Year's Eve, 2019. And I'm sitting on the couch, and my boyfriend is outside having a cigarette, and I'm just sitting there alone on the couch, just hanging out. And all of a sudden I hear in my head a voice, and the voice says, "Let me show you something." And I was like, okay. So I like kind of closed my eyes and went into my mind's eye, and I was sitting in a car, in the back seat of a car. And there was what looked like, appeared to be a male figure in the front driver's side seat. And he did not turn to look at me. It was just like his side profile. And I'm pretty sure it was my brother. And there was this child in the front seat. It kind of looked like an older car, like a car that had like a bench seat in the front, like an old Marquis or something that didn't have captain's chairs type seats. So the car wasn't moving. I'm just sitting in the middle of the back of it, and he's in the front seat. This child is standing up on the bench seat in the middle, and they're staring back at me. They're looking at me. Their head is over like the headrest area, and their hands are on the top of the seat, and they're smiling at me. A little toddler. It was a curly haired, dark haired toddler. And I remember thinking, this is interesting. And it was like he was showing me, this child that was going to come to me. And so I think the reason he didn't show himself in the driver's seat is because he didn't want to detract from the message. Like, I have this child, and this child is going to come to you. So fast forward to a few months later, I got pregnant and miscarried. And then I got pregnant again. And then I gave birth to my daughter, and she is now 2, and she looks just like the vision that I saw, just like her. Like, it's uncanny. Same curly hair, very dark, wonderful teeth, little dimples. Exactly. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, he basically was just like telling me that it was going to be okay. I didn't know that I was going to miscarry, obviously, but he definitely was showing me that things were going to be okay and that she was going to come into my life. And he has been around. Like, I can feel him all the time. And when things happen in my life, he'll jump in and try to get my attention. When I was 16, I was walking with a friend of mine, and we had just walked out of my house, and we were walking like on this like little green front yard area. We lived in an apartment complex, and then there was a parking lot. And in the parking lot, my mom's car was parked like right in front of the path to our door. And middle of the day, we weren't talking about ghosts. We weren't talking about anything creepy. Like, it wasn't even on our radar at all. And as we're going to walk across the street to go to a store, and we just happened to be passing my mom's car. And my friend Molly at the time, she was, just looking around, and she looked at my mom's car, and she started freaking out. And I didn't even ask her what was going on. I just kind of followed her gaze. And her gaze was looking at my mother's car. I looked over, and in the passenger seat in the front, I saw my brother. He was sitting there. He looked the age he did when he passed away. He was wearing a white shirt, and he always had these like really intense eyes. And I just remember seeing his eyes, and they were just staring at me. And then his body kind of disappeared, but I could still see his eyes, and then he disappeared. It all happened in a matter of seconds. It was very fast. And my friend Molly, who saw it first, she was like, "Did you see that?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I didn't say anything to her. I didn't tell her it was my brother. I just kind of, until I had time to process it. Because then I was like, yeah, that was definitely Jason. And she later on was like, "Oh my gosh, that's so crazy." Yeah, he was still around. And I know that when my mom has trouble, like, she'll be on the phone with family, and if something bad is going on, like, she'll be upset. And then she one time got off the phone, and she saw him standing in the corner of her living room. And she is in denial about it, but she's like, "I could have sworn I saw him standing in the corner." And I was like, that's because he was standing in the corner. He does show up for me in various ways. I did open up a business where I do animal communication on the side. I'm a vet tech full time, but I started doing animal communication like probably 4 years ago. And I finally started doing it, as a business probably within the last year. And, it's just a side thing. And I don't force it on anybody, but I remember thinking, years ago that it was complete BS, and I never wanted to believe it. But having these experiences, having my brother, be around and be able to communicate, I wanted to strengthen my intuition. So that helped me do it. And so I'm definitely way more connected with things around me now than I was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even. And so I definitely like to be open, and I know that things exist that you can't explain, and not everything is meant to be understood. But I do think that it's valuable for people to remember that we have those parts of ourselves that we can strengthen and be more in tune with things that are not in the physical realm, things that exist outside of our knowledge in different dimensions, whatever you want to say. And that's basically how I live my life now.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.